The insistent blare of a siren cut through the pre-dawn stillness of Atlanta, not an unusual sound. But this morning it felt personal, a discordant note in the symphony Judge Aaliyah Hayes was trying to conduct in her own mind. She glanced at the rearview mirror, her brow furrowing. A police cruiser, lights flashing, was signaling her to pull over. Great, she thought, a knot tightening in her stomach. Just what I needed. She had a major hearing scheduled, a complex case she'd poured weeks into, and a delay now was the last thing she wanted. Aaliyah carefully pulled her modest sedan to the curb, a flicker of annoyance warring with her ingrained respect for procedure. She watched as a figure emerged from the cruiser, tall, imposing, with the unmistakable swagger of someone comfortable in his authority. Officer Kevin Baxter. His approach was slow, deliberate, each step on the pavement seeming to echo the unease now coiling inside her. He tapped on her window. Aaliyah rolled it down, the cool morning air, a stark contrast to the sudden heat rising in her cheeks. "Good morning, officer," she said, her voice even professional. "Is there a problem?" Baxter leaned down, his face close. His eyes, a pale, washed-out blue, raked over her, lingering for a moment on her intricate cornrows before meeting hers. "License and registration, ma'am." His tone was flat, devoid of any courtesy. Aaliyah complied, handing over her documents. She knew she hadn't been speeding, hadn't run any lights. "May I ask what this is about, officer?" "You failed to signal a lane change back there," Baxter stated, his voice a low growl. A minor infraction if true, and one she was almost certain she hadn't committed. He took his time examining her license, his gaze flicking up to her face again, a smirk playing on his lips. "Aaliyah Hayes. That's a fancy name. What's a woman like you doing in this part of town so early?" The question, loaded and condescending, sent a shiver of warning down Aaliyah's spine. This wasn't a routine traffic stop. This was something else. "I'm on my way to work, officer," she replied, her voice still calm but with an edge of steel she couldn't quite suppress. "And my destination is none of your concern." Baxter's smirk widened, a predatory glint in his eyes. "Oh, it's my concern all right, ma'am, when you're driving a little too aggressively for this neighborhood." He handed back her license but held onto her registration. "Step out of the car, please." "Step out of the car," Aaliyah repeated, her annoyance now morphing into genuine alarm. "For a supposed signaling violation? Officer, I don't think that's necessary." "I'm not asking, ma'am. I'm telling you." His voice had hardened, the veneer of professionalism gone, replaced by a raw assertion of power. Now, Aaliyah knew the law. She knew her rights. But she also knew the dangerous reality of these encounters, the inherent imbalance of power. Arguing further on the side of a dark street with an agitated officer was a risk she wasn't willing to take. With a deep, steadying breath, she unbuckled her seatbelt. As she reached for the door handle, her fingers, almost on autopilot, found the record button on her phone, nestled discreetly in the center console. A small, almost imperceptible click. She stepped out into the chilly air, her heart pounding against her ribs. Baxter stood too close, his presence overwhelming. "Turn around, hands on the car." "Officer, this is completely uncalled for," Aaliyah said, her voice trembling slightly despite her efforts. "I am a judge in this city. I demand to know why I am being treated this way." The announcement of her profession, which she had hoped might de-escalate the situation, seemed to have the opposite effect. Baxter's eyes narrowed, a new, more malicious light entering them. "A judge, huh?" he sneered. "Well, Judge, maybe you need a little lesson in respecting the law yourself, and a little lesson in proper presentation." Before Aaliyah could react, before she could even process his words, his hand shot out, not to cuff her, not to search her. In his hand, glinting under the streetlights, was a small pair of scissors, the kind one might keep in a glove compartment. With a swift, brutal motion, he grabbed a thick, carefully braided lock of her hair, one of the cornrows that framed her face. "What are you doing?" Aaliyah cried out, a jolt of pure, unadulterated shock and violation coursing through her. The sound was sickeningly final. Aaliyah felt a tug, then a horrifying lightness as a significant piece of her hair, her identity, her pride, fell to the grimy pavement. Baxter held up the severed braid for a moment, a triumphant, almost leering expression on his face. "Maybe now you'll think twice about that fancy attitude, Judge." He spat, the words laced with a venom that chilled her to the bone. "And that? Unprofessional hair." He tossed the braid onto the hood of her car. Then, with a final contemptuous look, turned and strode back to his cruiser. The sound of his car pulling away was the loudest sound in the world. Aaliyah stood frozen, her hand flying to the now uneven side of her head. Tears welled in her eyes, hot and furious, but she fought them back. The violation was profound, a physical and psychological assault. He hadn't just cut her hair. He had tried to cut her down, to humiliate her, to strip her of her dignity because she dared to be a black woman, a judge, who wouldn't cower. The dawn was indeed fractured, and Aaliyah Hayes knew, with a chilling certainty, that this was only the beginning of a storm. The drive to the courthouse was a blur. Aaliyah's hands trembled on the steering wheel, not from the morning chill, but from a potent cocktail of rage, disbelief, and a profound sense of violation. The severed braid lay on the passenger seat, a grotesque trophy of Baxter's malice. Each red light, each stop sign, felt like an eternity, giving her too much time to replay the humiliating encounter. She parked in her designated spot, her mind racing. How could she walk into her courtroom like this? How could she face her staff, the lawyers, the defendants, with this raw wound, both visible and invisible? For a fleeting moment, she considered calling in sick, retreating to the safety of her home. But then, a different kind of fire ignited within her. She wouldn't let him win. She wouldn't let Baxter's thuggery derail her duty, her purpose. In the sterile quiet of her chambers, Aaliyah stared at her reflection. The uneven gap in her cornrows was stark, a brutal gash against her scalp. She took a deep breath, her legal training kicking in, forcing a semblance of composure. She carefully rearranged the remaining braids, trying to obscure the damage as best she could. It was a flimsy disguise, but it would have to do. The mask of judicial impartiality, she realized, was one she would have to wear more convincingly than ever today. Her clerk, a kind, efficient woman named Sarah, knocked softly. "Good morning, Judge Hayes." "Ready for the Henderson arraignment?" Aaliyah turned, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Morning, Sarah." "Yes, almost ready." The morning session was a grueling test of her resolve. Every rustle in the gallery, every sideways glance, made her self-conscious, wondering if they could see, if they knew. But she pushed through, her voice steady as she ruled on motions, listened to arguments, her focus a shield against the turmoil within. Justice, she reminded herself, couldn't afford to be shaken by personal assaults. During the lunch recess, the facade finally crumbled. She locked her chamber door and sank into her chair, the events of the morning washing over her in a fresh wave of nausea and fury. That's when she called Imani Washington. Imani, a sharp-witted civil rights attorney and Aaliyah's closest friend since law school, arrived within the hour, her usual vivacious energy instantly replaced by a look of grave concern as Aaliyah recounted the morning's events. Her voice cracking despite her best efforts. That bastard?" Imani seethed, her fists clenching after Aaliyah finished. "He did what?" "Aaliyah, this isn't just an overzealous cop. This is an assault. This is a hate crime." Aaliyah nodded numbly, finally letting the tears flow. "I know, Imani. I didn't know what to do. I recorded some of it on my phone, but I was so shaken." They listened to the recording together. The initial exchange was clear. Baxter's condescending tone, Aaliyah's firm but polite responses. But then, just as the confrontation escalated, as Baxter ordered her out of the car, the audio became distorted, a cacophony of street noise and static. The crucial moments, his vile words about her hair, the sickening snip of the scissors, were lost in a frustrating, unintelligible garble. "Damn it," Imani muttered, running a hand through her own braids in frustration. The most critical part. He must have bumped the phone, or the microphone got covered. Aaliyah's shoulders slumped. The one piece of concrete evidence she thought she had was compromised. "So what now?" she asked, a note of despair creeping into her voice. "It's my word against a police officer's. We know how that usually ends." "No," Imani said, her eyes blazing with a fierce protectiveness. "We don't let it end there, Aaliyah. We fight. That recording, even garbled, shows his aggressive demeanor. Your testimony is powerful. And his badge number. We can look into this guy. I guarantee you, a cop who does this isn't a first-time offender." Imani's conviction was a lifeline. Aaliyah wasn't alone in this. "But my career, Imani. If this gets out, if I make a public fuss." "Your career?" Imani cut her off gently. "Aaliyah, what he did was an attack on who you are, on your dignity. If we let men like Baxter get away with this, what message does that send? We find a way. We find a strategy. But we do not stay silent." The mask of the unflappable judge was gone. In its place was a woman, hurt and angry, but with a flicker of her friend's fighting spirit beginning to take root. The silence Baxter had tried to impose with his scissors was, perhaps, about to be shattered. The weight of Imani's words, and the raw, unprocessed trauma of the morning, led Aaliyah to seek counsel from the one person she knew would understand the labyrinthine complexities of the justice system and the insidious nature of prejudice within it. Retired federal Judge Elijah Sterling. Judge Sterling, a man whose wisdom was etched as deeply into his face as the lines of a life lived in service and struggle, received Aaliyah in the sun-drenched study of his quiet suburban home. He was a legend in Atlanta's legal circles, a black man who had risen through the ranks in an era when the odds were insurmountably stacked against him. His portrait hung in the very courthouse Aaliyah now served. He listened patiently as Aaliyah recounted the incident with Officer Baxter, his expression unreadable at first. He examined the severed braid she'd brought, turning it over in his long, elegant fingers. When she played the garbled recording, he closed his eyes, a flicker of something akin to pain crossing his features. "Officer Kevin Baxter," he said softly when she had finished, the name rolling off his tongue with a weary familiarity. "I'm not surprised. Men like him, they are a sickness in the uniform." Aaliyah felt a surge of validation. "So you believe me, Judge? You think we can fight this?" Judge Sterling opened his eyes, and Aaliyah was taken aback by the profound sadness she saw there. "Believe you, Aaliyah? Of course. I believe you. I've lived variations of your story, child. I've seen it, felt it, in ways you are only now beginning to comprehend." He paused, looking out the window at the meticulously kept garden. "But fighting it, that's a different beast altogether." This was not the unwavering call to arms Aaliyah had, perhaps naively, expected. "What do you mean, Judge?" "I mean," he said, turning back to her, his gaze direct and piercing, "that the system is designed to protect its own. Officer Baxter is a cog, a particularly rotten one perhaps, but a cog nonetheless. You go after him directly, loudly, without irrefutable, unimpeachable evidence, and that system will close ranks. It will chew you up and spit you out, Aaliyah. Your career, your reputation, they will try to shred it all." Aaliyah felt a chill. This was a far cry from Imani's righteous fire. "But the recording, my testimony, your word against his," Sterling interjected gently. "A black woman, a judge no less, accusing a white officer. They will twist it. They will say you were arrogant, non-compliant, that he felt threatened. The garbled recording, they'll use it to discredit you further, claim you tampered with it or that it proves nothing. The fact that you are a judge might even work against you. They'll paint you as someone abusing your position to settle a personal score." His words were a bitter pill. Aaliyah had come seeking an ally, a champion. Instead, she was getting a harsh dose of reality. "So you're saying I should do nothing?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. The thought was a fresh wave of violation. "No, child. I am not saying do nothing, Judge Sterling said, his voice softening. Silence is a complicity we cannot afford. What I am saying is that you must be smart. Smarter than them, more patient. This cannot be a frontal assault. Not yet. It must be a carefully orchestrated campaign. You need more than just your word. You need to find other victims of Baxter, if they exist. You need to understand the internal politics of the NOPD. You need to build a case so airtight that they have no choice but to act. He leaned forward. This will be a long, ugly fight, Aaliyah. It will test you in ways you cannot imagine. Are you prepared for that? Are you prepared for the whispers, the doubts, the potential damage to the career you've worked so hard to build? Aaliyah looked at the distinguished judge, a man who had clearly fought these battles and borne these scars. His advice wasn't born of cynicism, but of painful experience. The initial fire of her anger was now tempered by a cold, hard understanding of the battlefield. I don't know if I'm prepared, Judge, she admitted honestly. But I know I can't let him get away with this. I can't live with myself if I do. A rare, faint smile touched Judge Sterling's lips. Good. That fighting spirit, that's what will see you through. But channel it wisely, Aaliyah. Don't let your anger blind you. Let it fuel your precision. He then began to outline a more cautious, strategic approach, one that involved careful digging, quiet networking, and biding their time until the moment was right. Aaliyah left Judge Sterling's home with a heavy heart, but also with a newfound clarity. The path ahead was far more treacherous than she had initially perceived. The twist wasn't just the garbled recording, it was the sobering realization that her position, her truth, might not be enough. The real fight wouldn't just be against Officer Baxter, but against the very system she was a part of. Following Judge Sterling's sobering advice, Aaliyah and Imani shifted their strategy. The initial, impulsive desire for immediate public confrontation was replaced by a quiet, methodical Azerbaijanis for leverage. Their first target, Officer Kevin Baxter's service record and any unofficial history of misconduct. Imani, with her network of contacts within the legal and activist communities, began to discreetly Azerbaijanis. She put out feelers, asking trusted colleagues if they'd ever encountered or heard complaints about an Officer Baxter fitting his description. Aaliyah, meanwhile, tried to recall every detail of the encounter, every nuance of Baxter's behavior, searching for anything that might point to a pattern. The official channels yielded little. Baxter's NOPD record was, as Maya had found in the previous story's iteration, frustratingly clean, at least on the surface. A few commendations, no official disciplinary actions. It was the wall of blue silence, a familiar frustration for Imani. They bury this stuff deep, Aaliyah, Imani said, poring over a heavily redacted internal affairs summary she'd managed to obtain through a Freedom of Information Act request that took weeks to process and yielded almost nothing of substance. Unless there's a lawsuit or a major scandal, these complaints often just disappear into a file drawer. But Imani's unofficial network proved more fruitful, albeit slowly. Whispers emerged. A defense attorney recalled a client mentioning an overly aggressive officer matching Baxter's description during an arrest, though no formal complaint was filed. A community organizer spoke of rumors in a particular neighborhood about an officer who seemed to target young black men with a particular relish. The name Baxter Accessory up a couple of times, always associated with an arrogant demeanor and a quick temper. The most promising lead came from an unexpected source. A junior officer, someone Aaliyah had briefly mentored during a ride-along program for aspiring law students years ago, reached out to her anonymously. Let's call him Officer Miller. He'd heard Aaliyah's name connected with an incident involving Baxter and felt a conflicted loyalty. Judge Hayes, Miller's disguised voice said over a burner phone. I can't say much, and you didn't hear this from me. But Baxter, he's got a reputation. There was an incident a while back, a kid he roughed up pretty bad during a stop. It got hushed up, but people in his unit know. They call him the barber behind his back, a sick joke about how he likes to trim down anyone who gives him lip. The nickname sent a fresh chill down Alia's spine. The barber. It was too close, too specific. Do you have any details, Officer Miller? Anything concrete? I might be able to get you something. Miller hesitated. A copy of an unofficial incident report that never made it into the system. But it's risky, Judge. If they find out, I understand the risk. Alia said, her voice low and urgent. And I would be eternally grateful. This could be crucial. Miller promised to try. For a week, Alia and Imani waited on tenterhooks. Then, as suddenly as he had appeared, Officer Miller went silent. His burner phone was disconnected. He didn't respond to any further attempts at contact. The silence from Officer Miller was unnerving. Had he gotten cold feet, or had someone found out? Alia couldn't shake the feeling that Baxter, or his allies within the department, were aware that someone was digging. The realization that the blue wall might not just be passive silence, but active obstruction and potential intimidation, added a new layer of danger to their quest. The unofficial incident report Miller had mentioned remained an elusive, shattered piece of evidence. Weeks turned into a frustrating month. The trail Officer Miller had hinted at seemed to have gone cold. Alia and Imani were back to sifting through rumors and half-truths, the weight of Judge Sterling's cautious words pressing heavily upon them. The initial outrage had simmered into a slow-burning resolve, but the lack of tangible progress was disheartening. Then another anonymous tip arrived. This time through a cryptic email to Imani's law firm. The sender claimed to be a former colleague of Baxter's who had left the force due to ethical concerns. They alleged they had witnessed Baxter falsifying a report in an unrelated case a few years prior and might have a prior copy. They suggested a discreet meeting in a public, but not too crowded location, a lesser-known park on the outskirts of the city late one afternoon. This could be it, Alia, Imani said, her eyes alight with a cautious optimism they hadn't felt in weeks. If Baxter has a history of falsifying reports, it undermines his credibility entirely. It shows a pattern of deceit. Alia, however, felt a prickle of unease. The email was too convenient, the details accessory vague. It feels off, Imani. Why now? And why so cloak and dagger? Disparate people take disparate measures, Imani argued. Maybe their conscience finally got the better of them. Or maybe they have an axe to grind with Baxter. Either way, we have to check it out. We'll be careful. Judge Sterling, when consulted, shared Alia's apprehension. A baited hook often looks like a tasty worm, Alia, he warned. If you go, do not go alone and have a plan B. Trust your instincts. They decided Imani would go to the meeting, with Alia waiting a short distance away, ready to call for help or create a diversion if needed. Imani, though a lawyer, had a street-smart toughness about her. The park was eerily quiet as Imani arrived. The late afternoon sun cast long, unsettling shadows. She sat on the designated bench, her senses on high alert. Minutes stretched into an agonizing 10, then 15. No one appeared. Just as Imani was about to text Alia that it was a bust, two men, burly and dressed in plain dark clothes that screamed off-duty cops or security, emerged from behind a thicket of trees. They didn't approach the bench but began to walk slowly towards Imani. Their expressions unreadable but definitely not friendly. Imani's heart leaped into her throat. This wasn't a nervous informant. This felt like an ambush. She subtly reached for her phone, a prearranged distress signal to Alia. As her fingers brushed the screen, one of the men spoke, his voice a low growl. Looking for someone, counselor? Before Imani could respond, a car screeched to a halt on the access road bordering the park. Alia, having seen the men approach and sensing danger, had driven her car right onto the grass verge, horn blaring, headlights flashing. The sudden commotion startled the two men. They exchanged a quick, frustrated glance. Then, realizing their Azerbaijanis had been compromised, turned and melted back into the trees as quickly as they had appeared. Alia rushed to Imani, her face pale. Are you okay? Who were they? Imani was shaken but unharmed. I don't know. But they weren't here to give me evidence, Aaliyah. They were here for me, or to send a message. Iparadia Reses, Undo, Jr. Morkan Blasage, Ipraeum, Aaliyah, Morses, Ipraeus, K. Moore. The realization hit them both with cold force. This wasn't just about Baxter anymore. They had poked a hornet's nest, and someone was willing to go to great lengths to silence them. The tip had been a decoy, a trap. Their quiet investigation had just become dangerously loud. The failed ambush in the park served as a chilling wake-up call. Aaliyah and Imani understood that their discreet inquiries had been noticed, and the forces protecting Officer Baxter were willing to play dirty. The immediate instinct was to retreat, to reconsider the risks. But the brazenness of the attempt to intimidate Imani also ignited a new level of anger and determination. "They want us to be scared, Aaliyah," Imani said, her voice tight with fury. As they replayed the incident later that evening in the safety of Aaliyah's apartment, "They want us to back down. We can't let them win like that." Judge Sterling, informed of the near miss, was gravely concerned. "This has escalated," he said, his usual calm tinged with urgency. "You are no longer just investigating an officer. You are challenging a culture. You need more than just legal maneuvering now. You need public awareness. You need a shield." His words resonated with Imani's own thoughts. She knew a reputable investigative journalist, David Carter, known for his tenacity and integrity in exposing corruption and misconduct. He worked for a respected independent news outlet in Atlanta. It was a risk. Going public could backfire, could further enrage Baxter's allies. But staying silent felt like an even greater risk now. After a long, soul-searching discussion, Aaliyah agreed. It was time to widen the battlefield. Imani reached out to David Carter, carefully laying out the known facts, emphasizing the intimidation attempt, but initially keeping Aaliyah's identity as a judge anonymous, referring to her only as a respected professional woman. Carter, intrigued by the potential for a significant story about police misconduct and cover-ups, agreed to look into it. His investigation, though initially met with the same stonewalling Aaliyah and Imani had encountered, began to gain traction. Carter had sources and methods they didn't. He started connecting dots, finding other potential victims of Baxter's aggressive policing, people who had been too afraid or too marginalized to come forward before. The first article Carter published was a carefully worded exposé. It detailed the alleged incident involving a professional woman and an unnamed officer, focusing on the pattern of complaints against this officer and the subsequent intimidation tactics. It didn't name Aaliyah, but the details were specific enough to cause a stir within legal and activist circles. The community's echo began. Local civil rights organizations, already aware of simmering tensions between NOPD and certain neighborhoods, picked up on the story. Social media buzzed with speculation and outrage. People started sharing their own negative experiences with the police, emboldened by Carter's article. The hashtag number #AtlantaShield, referencing the police badge and the need for accountability, began to trend locally. In response to the mounting public pressure and Carter's damning, though still partially anonymous report, the NOPD, instead of showing contrition, went on the defensive. They issued a strong statement, not denying an interaction had occurred, but reframing it. They claimed the professional woman had been uncooperative and verbally abusive during a legitimate traffic stop, and that the officer involved had acted professionally under duress. They announced an internal review, but it was widely perceived as a token gesture, a way to control the narrative. This blatant attempt to discredit the victim and whitewash the incident infuriated Aaliyah and Imani. It was a public slap in the face. The NOPD wasn't just protecting Baxter. They were actively trying to destroy Aaliyah's credibility before she even had a chance to speak her name. The fight had just become very, very public. The NOPD's dismissive and accusatory statement was the spark that ignited a wildfire. Instead of quelling the public outcry, it fueled it. David Carter's follow-up articles relentlessly poked holes in the official narrative, presenting testimonies, still anonymous, from individuals who had suffered similar encounters with an officer fitting Baxter's description. The community's echo grew louder, more insistent. Aaliyah, watching this unfold, felt a roiling mix of fear and a burgeoning sense of obligation. The anonymity she had clung to was becoming a liability, allowing the NOPD to paint her as a faceless, unreliable accuser. Judge Sterling's earlier warnings about the system closing ranks were proving terrifyingly accurate. "They're trying to bury me before I even stand up," Aaliyah told Imani and Judge Sterling during an urgent meeting. "If I don't speak out as myself, they'll win. They'll make me the villain." Imani, though still concerned for Aaliyah's safety and career, saw the strategic imperative. "You're right, Aaliyah. Anonymity was a shield, but now it's a muzzle. Carter has laid the groundwork. The public is listening. If you come forward now, with your full anerkennung and credibility as a judge, it could be a game changer." Judge Sterling, his expression grave, finally nodded. "The time for caution may be over, Aaliyah. They have forced your hand, but if you do this, you must be prepared for the full force of their retaliation. They will scrutinize every aspect of your life, your career. It will be a trial by fire." The decision was agonizing, but Aaliyah knew what she had to do. The risk to her career was immense, but the cost of silence was even greater. Not just for her, but for all the others who had suffered and would continue to suffer if impunity reigned. A coalition of local civil rights organizations, already galvanized by Carter's reporting, offered to host a press conference. It was a public gamble, a high-stakes move that could either amplify her voice, destroy her. The day of the press conference, Aaliyah felt a strange calm descend over her. She stood before a bank of microphones and cameras, Imani by her side, Judge Sterling watching from the front row. Her voice, when she began to speak, was clear and unwavering. She introduced herself, stated her position as a sitting judge, and then, with a raw honesty that captivated the room, she recounted the full, unvarnished truth of her encounter with Officer Kevin Baxter. She spoke of the fear, the humiliation, the profound sense of violation. She held up a small, clear plastic bag containing the severed lock of her hair. "This," she said, her voice trembling slightly but her gaze firm, "is not just my hair. It is a symbol of the contempt Officer Baxter holds for the citizens he has sworn to protect. It is a symbol of the abuse of power that too many in our community, especially people of color, endure in silence." Her speech was powerful, unscripted, and deeply personal. It was the act of a judge stepping down from the bench to stand with the people. As Aaliyah concluded her emotional statement and the room buzzed with reporters' energy to ask questions, a figure stepped forward from the back of the room. It was a young NOPD officer, his face pale but resolute. "Judge Hayes is telling the truth," he said, his voice amplified by a nearby microphone. "My name is Officer Ben Carter, no relation to the journalist, purely coincidental to add to the drama. And I was on patrol in the area that morning. I didn't see the actual assault, but I saw Officer Baxter interacting with Judge Hayes's vehicle. I heard him on the radio later, bragging to another officer about putting some uppity woman in her place. He mentioned her hair. I didn't realize what he'd truly done until now. I can't stay silent any longer." A wave of shock and excitement swept through the room. An officer breaking ranks, corroborating even a part of Aaliyah's story, was a bombshell. The NOPD's carefully constructed narrative of a non-compliant Aaliyah was suddenly on very shaky ground. Officer Ben Carter's unexpected corroboration sent shockwaves through the NOPD and the city. The internal investigation, which had been proceeding at a glacial pace, was suddenly under intense scrutiny. Chief Donovan, facing a full-blown crisis, publicly promised a thorough and expedited review in light of the new testimony. But behind the scenes, the power play intensified. Officer Baxter, now facing a far more serious situation, was not without allies. A powerful faction within the police union, known for its aggressive defense of officers accused of misconduct, rallied around him. They began a smear campaign, leaking carefully selected, out-of-context details from Aaliyah's past, a minor college disciplinary issue, a disputed ruling from early in her judicial career, to sympathetic media outlets, attempting to paint her as biased, unstable, or a troublemaker. Simultaneously, immense pressure was brought to bear on Officer Ben Carter. He was subjected to internal ostracization, Azerbaijani's threats to his career, and veiled warnings about his family's safety. His locker was vandalized. He was assigned the worst shifts. The blue wall of silence was proving to be a formidable and vindictive opponent. Aaliyah, while buoyed by Officer Carter's bravery, found herself in the eye of a hurricane. Her personal life was dissected in public. Her judicial impartiality was questioned. Some colleagues distanced themselves, fearing Azerbaijanis. The stress was immense, a constant, grinding pressure that tested her resolve daily. "This is what they do, Aaliyah," Judge Sterling told her, his voice filled with a grim understanding. "They try to break you. They try to isolate you. They try to make you an example so no one else dares to speak out." Imani worked tirelessly, fending off the legal and public relations attacks, filing counter-complaints, and ensuring Officer Carter had legal representation and support. But it felt like a battle against a hydra. Cut off one head, and two more appeared. The breaking point came during a preliminary hearing for Officer Carter's testimony within the NOPD's internal review. Under intense cross-examination by a lawyer from the police union, and visibly shaken by weeks of harassment, Officer Carter faltered. He didn't recant his entire story, but he backtracked on key details, claiming he might have misheard Baxter's bragging, that he couldn't be absolutely certain. It was specifically about Aaliyah's hair. His testimony, once a pillar of Aaliyah's case, was now significantly weakened, riddled with doubt. The union lawyer pounced, declaring Carter an unreliable, attention-seeking witness. The NOPD, relieved, began to steer the narrative back towards their original claim of a misunderstanding. Aaliyah watched, a cold dread seeping into her. The system, it seemed, was an expert at protecting itself, even at the cost of truth and justice. Her public gamble, which had seemed so promising, was now teetering on the brink of collapse. The Azerbaijanis of Officer Carter's testimony was a devastating blow. Public momentum stalled. The NOPD's internal review seemed poised to exonerate Baxter, or at best, issue another token reprimand. Aaliyah felt a despair deeper than any she had experienced before. Had it all been for nothing? Had she risked everything only to be crushed by the very system she served? Imani, though equally disheartened, refused to give up. "There has to be something else, Aaliyah," she insisted, spreading case files and notes across Aaliyah's living room floor. "Something we missed. Baxter can't be this clean." Judge Sterling, too, urged them not to lose hope. "Sometimes, Aaliyah," he said, his voice a low rumble, "the direct path is blocked. You must look for the Azerbaijanis, the unexpected angle. Every man, no matter how careful, leaves a trace." They spent days, Energije, re-examining every piece of information, every rumor, every redacted document. The garbled audio from Aaliyah's phone, long dismissed as unusable, was revisited. Imani sent it to a forensic audio specialist, a long shot, but they were running out of options. The specialist's report came back with a surprising, though initially perplexing, finding. While the crucial words about the hair assault remained unintelligible, the background noise on the recording, when enhanced, picked up something unexpected. Fragments of a radio dispatch call that Baxter had seemingly received during his interaction with Aaliyah. "This is odd," Imani said, frowning at the transcript. "The dispatch call isn't related to Aaliyah's stop. It's about a suspected B.E. a few blocks away. It came in while he was still with you." Aaliyah's mind raced. He never mentioned another call. He was entirely focused on me, on harassing me. The implications were significant. If Baxter had received a priority call for a potential felony in progress and had chosen to ignore it, or significantly delay his response, in order to continue his unwarranted stop and assault of Aaliyah, it constituted a serious dereliction of duty. This was a tangible, provable offense, separate from the he said, she said of the haircutting incident. Imani immediately filed a new supplementary complaint with the NOPD's Internal Affairs, and more importantly, with the city's Independent Police Oversight Board, an entity less beholden to the NOPD's internal culture. She included the enhanced audio, the dispatch logs, which they subpoenaed, and a timeline demonstrating Baxter's failure to respond to a priority call. This new evidence shifted the entire dynamic. It was no longer just about Aaliyah's word against Baxter's regarding the assault. It was about Baxter's professional conduct, his fitness as an officer. The NOPD could try to downplay the misunderstanding with Aaliyah, but ignoring a felony call in progress? That was much harder to spin, especially with an election looming and the mayor already under pressure regarding police accountability. The blue wall around Baxter began to show serious cracks. Ignoring a priority call was a black mark that even his staunchest union defenders would find difficult to erase. The focus of the investigation, and the public narrative, subtly shifted. Aaliyah's assault was still a key component, but Baxter's dereliction of duty provided a less ambiguous, more administratively damning charge. It was the final, unexpected gambit, a checkmate move that came from an entirely unforeseen direction. The new evidence regarding Officer Baxter's dereliction of duty landed like a bombshell within the NOPD and the city's oversight board. The enhanced audio, cross-referenced with official dispatch logs, painted a clear picture. Baxter had indeed lingered with Aaliyah, escalating a minor traffic stop into a personal confrontation, while a more serious call went unheeded for a critical period. The internal investigation, which had been Azerbaijanis towards the Azerbaijanis of Baxter, was now forced to reconvene with a new, undeniable charge. The police union's defense of Baxter, while still vocal, lost much of its Azerbaijanis. Defending an officer accused of excessive force was one thing. Defending one who demonstrably neglected a priority call for a potential felony was a far more difficult proposition. Chief Donovan, already under immense pressure, saw the writing on the wall. The political fallout of protecting Baxter now far outweighed any loyalty to a problematic officer. The city council was making noise. Community groups were planning larger protests. The decision, when it finally came, was delivered with less fanfare than the initial internal review announcement. Officer Kevin Baxter was found to have committed a serious dereliction of duty, a violation of department policy regarding response to priority calls, and had displayed conduct unbecoming of an officer. The haircutting incident, while mentioned as part of the inappropriate conduct, was somewhat overshadowed by the more administratively clear-cut offense. The disciplinary action was severe. Immediate termination of employment from the New Orleans Police Department. There would be no criminal charges filed against Baxter for the assault on Aaliyah. The district attorney's office, citing the weakened testimony of Officer Ben Carter and the ambiguity of the initial audio recording regarding the specific act of cutting her hair, deemed the evidence insufficient for a criminal conviction beyond a reasonable doubt. It was a bitter pill for Aaliyah and Imani, a stark reminder of the high bar for criminal prosecution against police officers. However, Baxter's career as a police officer was over. His badge was stripped, his authority revoked. News of his termination sent Baxter into a rage. In a desperate, unhinged act, he attempted to confront Aaliyah outside the courthouse one evening as she was leaving work. He was disheveled, ranting about how she had ruined his life. Fortunately, courthouse security, already on heightened alert due to the notoriety of the case, intervened swiftly. Baxter was apprehended for harassment and violating a temporary restraining order Imani had proactively secured after his termination. It was a pathetic, final display of the malice that had started it all, but it only served to further validate the NOPD's decision. Aaliyah, though shaken by the attempted confrontation, felt a profound sense of closure. Baxter was no longer a threat in uniform. The system, in its own convoluted way, had, to a degree, held him accountable. Victory, Aaliyah discovered, had a bittersweet taste. Officer Baxter was gone from the force, a tangible outcome of her long and arduous fight. Yet, the absence of criminal charges for the assault itself left a lingering ache, a sense that complete justice remained elusive. The scars, both on her scalp where her hair was slowly, unevenly growing back, and deeper within her spirit, were a constant reminder. In the weeks and months that followed, Aaliyah grappled with the aftermath. She had faced down a bully and a resistant system, and in doing so, had become an unintentional symbol. She received letters and emails from across the country, some of Azerbaijanis, sharing their own stories of injustice, others of support, praising her courage. But there were also Azerbaijanis' messages, Azerbaijanis' attacks on her character and her race, a dark undercurrent of the prejudice she had fought against. The ordeal had changed her. The idealism she had carried into her judgeship was now tempered with a harder-edged realism. She understood, in a way she never could have before, the profound vulnerability of those who came before her bench, especially those from marginalized communities. Her relationship with Imani deepened, forged in the crucible of their shared battle. Judge Sterling remained a steadfast mentor, offering his wisdom and perspective as Aaliyah navigated the complexities of her new public profile. The NOPD, under pressure, did implement some changes. Mandatory de-escalation and implicit bias training programs were expanded. The process for filing citizen complaints was made slightly more transparent, though activists argued it was still far from adequate. These were small steps, incremental shifts in a deeply entrenched culture, but they were steps nonetheless, a direct result of Aaliyah's refusal to be silenced. There was a quiet joy, too, the support from her community, from strangers who saw their own struggles reflected in hers, was a powerful balm. She found strength in their solidarity. The bitterness of the assault began to fade, replaced by a resilient determination. She had been violated, yes, but she had not been broken. One evening, looking at her reflection, Aaliyah made a decision. The uneven patches of her hair were a constant visible reminder of Baxter's attack. She called Imani. "I need a good stylist," she said, a new lightness in her voice. The next day, Aaliyah emerged from a salon with a chic, short, natural hairstyle. It was bold, confident, and entirely her own. It wasn't about hiding the scars. It was about reclaiming her image, defining herself on her own terms. It was a statement of strength, a symbol of her survival and her refusal to be diminished. The joy in that simple act of self-affirmation was profound, a personal victory that resonated deeply. Judge Aaliyah Hayes returned to her courtroom, not as the same woman who had been assaulted on that fractured dawn, but as one forged anew by fire. The experience had etched itself into her very being, shaping her perspective, deepening her empathy. Her colleagues noticed the change. There was a new gravity in her demeanor, a heightened awareness in her eyes. When lawyers argued before her, when defendants stood awaiting judgment, she saw them not just as case numbers or legal statutes, but as human beings, each with their own story, their own vulnerabilities. Her rulings, always fair, now carried an extra layer of underkenning for the systemic factors that often contributed to an individual's presence in her courtroom. She became known for her willingness to listen, truly listen, and for her underkenning to ensuring that justice, as much as humanly possible, was not just blind, but also compassionate. The city of Atlanta continued to grapple with the issues her case had brought to the forefront. The conversations about police accountability, racial bias, and the treatment of women of color were more open, more urgent. Aaliyah, though she shied away from becoming a political figure, occasionally accepted invitations to speak at law schools or community forums, sharing her story not as a victim, but as a survivor, and as a call for continued vigilance and reform. Her short, powerful hairstyle became an unintentional symbol for many. One late afternoon, months later, Aaliyah was presiding over a pre-trial hearing. A young black woman stood before her, accused of a minor offense, but alleging police harassment during her arrest. The details were disturbingly familiar. The assigned public defender seemed overworked, perhaps a little green. Aaliyah listened intently, her gaze unwavering. She saw the fear in the young woman's eyes, the echo of her own past trauma. She made a note, then looked directly at the young prosecutor and the defense attorney. "Counselors," Judge Hayes said, her voice calm but carrying an undeniable authority, "I want to ensure every aspect of this arrest is thoroughly examined. Every right protected, every voice heard." She paused, her eyes sweeping the courtroom. There is no room for shortcuts when liberty and dignity are at stake. As she spoke, her fingers unconsciously brushed against her short-cropped hair. A faint smile touched her lips. The fight was far from over. The system was vast, its imperfections deeply ingrained. But she was here. She was a judge, and she would wield her gavel, not with vengeance, but with a renewed, unshakable commitment to a justice that was truly for all. Just then, her clerk handed her a note. It was an anonymous tip detailing a pattern of troubling behavior by a different officer in a different precinct. Aaliyah read it, her expression thoughtful. Another battle loomed. But this time, she knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, that she was ready. The silence had been shattered, and the echoes of justice, however faint at times, would continue to resonate.